Hello students. In this video lecture, we are going to discuss about the operations of operating system structure. Multiprogramming is a fundamental aspect of an operating system. What is multiprogramming? Multiprogramming is a technique by which the performance of a CPU can be drastically improved. The reason that multiprogramming is invariably implemented by every operating system is that it is impossible for a single program to keep the CPU to be busy all the time, because a program will generally have a number of IO operations, like some printf statements and some scanf statements will be there in each and every program. So for such statements, the CPU cannot complete that particular operation because it requires the usage of an external device. Like if it is a scanf operation, then the keyboard has to be made use of to complete it. Similarly, for a printf, a monitor has to be utilized. So the CPU has to wait for the completion of those operations with the help of the external devices, and which will result in wasting of CPU time. So the reason that a single program cannot give the best performance is that there is definitely going to be IO operations involved. Now, what is the way to overcome this? The situation in any system is that there are always plenty of programs available for execution. So users generally load more number of programs simultaneously into the main memory, and there is a choice of programs available in the main memory normally. So multiprogramming increases the CPU utilization by organizing jobs so that the CPU always has one to execute. So the idea of multiprogramming is like this: whenever the currently running program has to undergo some IO operation, immediately the CPU will be switched from that program to some other program which is waiting for execution in the main memory, so that the CPU doesn't need to wait for the completion of the IO operation. Instead, it can focus on execution of another program. So in this way, the OS will keep replace the current programs whenever they are going through some kind of an IO operation or any other reason for them to be delayed. Immediately they will be switched and a new program will be provided to the processor. We can relate this idea to a common example that we all experience in our life, that we all go to consultation hospitals for consultation. So the scenario is like this: if a patient enters into the doctor's room, the doctor will start the consultation by asking what is the problem or what is the complaint. When the patient explains what he is experiencing and or what he is suffering, the doctor may decide for further investigation. Some test needs to be taken. Let's say an X-ray has to be taken, or for some blood test has to be taken. So he will ask the patient to take the test and come back again. And meanwhile, while the patient is gone out for taking those tests, the doctor will not be wasting his time by waiting for that patient to come back. Instead, he will let the next patient waiting in the queue outside to enter into the consultation room, and he will interact with that particular patient. If that patient is also requiring some test, then the same thing will be followed now. The doctor will send that patient for testing and the next patient will come. And meanwhile, when the patient who goes out for the test gets the reports for those tests, he will be now waiting outside again, and then he will enter into the doctor's room once again, and finally he will finish the consultation. So this is actually the basic idea that has been incorporated into multiprogramming. So the idea is as follows: the program operating system keeps several jobs in memory simultaneously. This is fundamental requirement of multiprogramming. There should be choice of programs. If there is only one program in the main memory, then CPU waiting for the IO operation is inevitable. But normally this situation will never occur. There are always more programs or more applications waiting in the memory. But there is one limitation to this objective, that the amount of main memory is not sufficient enough to have huge number of processes. So one way of tackling this is to maintain the processes in the disk. So when the main memory don't have the space, the program can be, or the processes can be kept in the disk. Now the operating system will get send one of the program to the CPU based on some scheduling algorithm, and that program will commence the IO commence the execution, and as soon as it reach an IO operation, then if it is a non-multi-programmed system, then the CPU will simply wait sit idle for the completion of the IO operation. Because see, one more problem here is that if the CPU leaves the current process, when it cannot resume the execution of the same process again, because it will have no way of knowing whether the IO operation is completed or not. That was a situation until interrupts were not invented and not implemented in the computers. If the current program is temporarily stopped for some IO operation, there is no way to communicate to the CPU that the IO operation is completed and the execution can be resumed for that process. But once the interrupts were added into the CPU implementation, now it's conveniently followed like this, that the CPU can remove the process from itself and take a new process, and when there is an interrupt occurs later from the older process that the IO operation is completed, it can be scheduled again for execution of the remaining instructions. So this idling of the CPU as it happened in the non-multi-programmed systems has been removed in the case of multi-programmed systems. So in a multi-programmed system, the OS switches from one program to another, so that the CPU always having some execution and it's never being idle. This is a small demo of how multi-programming improves the CPU performance. Just look at this case where there is a CPU and for 4 programs or 4 processes or jobs are waiting in the queue. Now what will happen is, at some point of time, job 1 will enter into the CPU, and during its course of execution, let us assume it encounters a scanf statement, and as we have already pointed out, scanf statement requires the usage of keyboard. So it's not just the CPU which can complete the execution, it requires the support of the keyboard. So the CPU will be wasting its time if it is waiting for the keyboard input. And one more problem with the keyboard input is that it not only is constrained by the speed of the keyboard, also by the speed of the human being who is going to type. So there is going to be a huge time taken for the input to become available. So it's unnecessary delay. Now how do you overcome this? You remove J1 or that first process from the CPU, and you put it in another queue. Let's call it as a waiting queue, and while now the CPU has been freed, so this opportunity can be utilized for the execution of process J2, and meanwhile J1 is going through the keyboard input, and once the keyboard input is over, J1 will once again get into the same queue which it was waiting previously, and will wait behind the previous processes. Now after some point of time, J1 will get the second turn, and during the second turn it may either get completed or it may result in another IO operation, and it will go through the same process. So this is the idea of multi-programming. Though this simulation I ran it very slowly, in an actual implementation, this switching will happen in too fast, like in microseconds. This all will happen. So it will create a illusion that all the programs are currently running. It's similar to that though our earth is rotating, we still don't experience it because it's rotating at a very high speed, so it looks as if it is just being idle. Same way, the CPU will switch among processes very quickly, giving an impression that every process is currently running on the CPU. We are now going to add one more element into the multiprogramming, which is time sharing. Multiprogramming drastically improves the performance of the CPU, but it still has one limitation, that if a long process or a process which don't have any IO operation enters into the CPU, it will occupy a lot of time in the CPU and increasing the waiting time of the processes that are waiting in the queue. So in other words, a long process could monopolize the CPU by spending too much time inside the CPU. So how do you overcome this, or how do you make it a fair and uniform distribution of CPU time to all the processes? The obvious technique is time sharing. So now what happens is that you are going to extend the multiprogramming by attaching a time shared scheme. So under time sharing, there is a time quantum which is selected and assumed for assigned for each and every process. So it will be a uniform time quantum for all the process irrespective of their size. So whenever a process gets into the CPU, it will only be allowed to run in the CPU for that particular time quantum, uh, and the process that is given a time quantum may either spend the full time quantum and will be preempted from the CPU because the time quantum is completed, or it cannot utilize the full time quantum because of an IO operation interrupting the process. So any one of these two will happen, that the process is either preempted after the time quantum, or the process is preempted before the time quantum because of an IO operation. But in either case, the process has to go back to the same ready queue and join the queue and wait for its turn again. And when it gets into the CPU, it's not going to get the missed time quantum as an additional time. It will only get the actual time quantum assigned by the CPU. So there is no way of utilizing the missed time quantum by any of the processes. So this is the arrangement of time shared systems, which is an extension of multiprogramming. So this is this now that previously I said the switching will be happening at a very rapid speed. Now this has been even more improved because every process will get the same time quantum. So the switching of process will happen irrespective of the need of any IO operation. Even if there are no IO operations involved in the current process, it will still be switched when the time quantum expires. So when many users are using a computer, they all will get a feel that the CPU is actually being used only by them because of this time sharing. Now we are introducing the terminology of a process. So what is a process? A process is simply a program that is running. So at any point of time, the memory will be occupied by a number of programs. So because we have got different applications or different softwares running in a computer, they all get loaded into the main memory. For example, right now I have loaded PowerPoint software and a software for screencasting, and there is a browser also in minimized state, and also I have some Word document, and there is an antivirus software which is running behind. So all these are different processes or different programs currently loaded into main memory, and when one of them is under execution, it becomes a process. So that is the idea of a process, a program that is currently running is called as a process. As we have already seen, because of the time quantum, every process only executes for a short period of time before it is either see, besides the reasons we have already seen what could cause a program to be removed from the CPU, there are also other reasons, like if the process is actually completed its execution, which means it is finished. In that case also it will be stopped, or it needs to go through an IO operation, so it will be stopped from execution and it will be removed from the CPU, or its time quantum is over. So in all the three cases, the current process is going to be removed from the CPU. And one more reason is pointed out is trapped by OS. So we have already seen in the previous lecture that whenever the current process makes an illegal attempt, for example making a divide by zero, or some memory violation, so in those cases the OS will terminate the current process, which is called as a trap. So in such case also that process is going to be removed from the CPU. Another is making a system call, like a fork call. So when the program makes a system call, that is also going to cause the current program to be stopped, because a system call requires OS to take charge of the system, and it has to execute the actual module behind the system call. So that will happen only after stopping the current process, and the OS will get into the CPU. The OS module will get into the CPU and execute, and then only the control will return back to the user process. So this is another reason. And one more reason is there is an external interrupt. For example, a program is currently running and suddenly an interrupt comes from some other device. So now also what will happen is the OS will sense that an interrupt has occurred, and in order to respond to that interrupt, it will stop the current process and will load a module of interrupt service routine. There is a special module of code called interrupt service routine, or ISR, is available, that is having the necessary code for handling all types of interrupts. So that code will be loaded into the or the execution will get into the ISR, and then the interrupt will be handled. So that is also a reason for ending the execution of the current process. And the last reason is we also have the idea of priority. Different priorities are being assigned to different processes. For example, the moment you press Ctrl Alt Delete, whatever the activity that is going on, immediately you will see the task manager appearing on the screen. That is because it is assigned high priority. So you can't just treat everything equal in a computer. It requires some differentiation among processes. So the high priority process, whenever it enters into the system, it will immediately given the CPU, which means the current process will be removed from the CPU. So we have listed a number of reasons which could cause the current process to be stopped either permanently or temporarily. These are various reasons. Be aware of all these reasons. So the advantage of multi-programming is we are able to make the CPU to be rapidly switched from process to process. So time sharing, and both the time sharing and multi-programming has a basic requirement that you should be able to keep several jobs in the memory. But problem is that we don't have sufficient main memory in every system. So we will generally have shortage of memory, and the reason for the shortage of memory is not just because the size of the memory is smaller. The size of the applications are also getting larger. So we have started implementing large applications which occupy more amount of main memory. For example, a lot of gaming softwares are highly graphical in nature, so they take a huge memory. So the memory is becoming insufficient in most cases. So that is a limitation of implementing the multi-programming. But we do have ways to overcome that. That is the concept of virtual memory. So virtual memory is a concept which will be discussed later, and the implementation of virtual memory allows more more memory, or the memory to be increased virtually. So that is, we have a limitation of physical memory or RAM memory. We can't overcome that unless we physically add one more memory chip and make it to be from 4 GB to 8 GB. But even that will have a limitation beyond a certain to 8 GB, for example. You can't add another chip into the computer. So physically we can only increase it to some extent, but we can extend it virtually with the help of virtual memory. So this is going to be the solution for the problem. So what is the way, how is it done, how virtual memory improves the performance of the, or improves the utilization of memory, main memory, is that swapping is used. So whenever you have some, let's say for example you have got some 100 process in the main memory, and out of the 100 some 10 are undergoing IO operation, or say they are all waiting in the waiting queue. So it doesn't make any difference if they are removed from the main memory and pushed into the secondary memory, because they are anyway waiting and they are not going to be executed until the IO operation is completed. So it makes sense to swap those processes with the secondary memory and bring new processes from secondary memory into main memory. So this swapping will be done with the help of the virtual memory. So, and the another advantage of virtual memory is that you never have to load the whole process into main memory. You can load them partially into main memory and remaining part in the secondary memory or virtual memory. We will discuss that. This requires the explanation of paging, the concept of paging, which will be covered in later. So as of now, the point is that virtual memory gives you that option of dividing every program into partitions, and load some partitions into main memory and load remaining partitions into virtual memory. So without loading the entire process into main memory, they still can be executed. That is the major and significant advantage of virtual memory. And in other words, it also means that you can even execute programs that are much larger than the main memory, because you no longer need the whole program to be, or the entire program to be loaded into main memory. And because of this, even if the program is larger than the main memory, it still can be executed, because you only need to load some part of the program into the main memory. So you can still execute them. And it also abstracts main memory. So we no longer need to bother about how much of main memory is physically available, because there is going to be an addition of virtual memory. So the main memory is going to be much more extended virtually. So this gives an abstraction of what the main memory to the user. This is now a small, a brief demo of how virtual memory helps in improving the or increasing the main memory. But as I told you, this will be an incomplete demo, because only when you add paging and discuss the implementation of virtual memory with the paging, it will be giving you a complete picture. But this is just about an initial understanding of virtual memory. So in a given situation, I have 4 GB of RAM and 500 GB of disk. So in any system, the amount of disk is always much larger than the RAM memory. That is a common situation. Now, at some point of time, the system experiences the situation that the main memory is full. So when the main memory is full, what are the drawbacks? You can't load any new program into RAM memory. Say there is suddenly a new process needs to get executed, but you can't even load it into the RAM memory. Number one. Another is, we have seen earlier that multi-programming requires you to load several programs into main memory. Only then the CPU can be switched from one process to another. But when the main memory is full, you can't load any more process into main memory. So it will also affect multi-programming, and it may result in CPU to become idle, since all the programs may be undergoing IO operation. That is, all the programs currently in main memory may suddenly get into waiting state and no process is ready for execution. So the CPU will be forced to be idle. So this is a problem that needs to be prevented. Now what we can do in this situation is that now the OS will create a memory called virtual memory inside the disk by borrowing 3 GB. I'm taking the values are just for sake of example. So I'm assuming that in the given implementation, the size of the virtual memory is fixed as 3 GB. So 3 GB of virtual memory will be created in the disk, and this will be added to the RAM memory. So what will happen is, now the RAM memory is increased by 3 GB and it becomes 7 GB. Remember, this is not done at the physical level. You can't merge disk memory with the RAM memory. Physically, they are two separate memories. Their characteristics are different. Their locations are different. So they cannot be merged in any way. But virtually, the OS creates a illusion that the RAM memory itself is enlarged to become 7 GB. So you can now deal with 7 GB of RAM memory. So you have now overcome the situation of full memory. Though in this example I said it that when there is a situation of full RAM, the virtual memory is implemented, but in actual operating systems the virtual memory is constantly implemented, that the moment you turn on your computer there is a virtual memory created and it is going to be used along with the RAM memory. So it's not going to wait for the RAM to become full to go for a virtual memory. It will try to prevent the situation of RAM full by always keeping a amount of virtual memory. So if you are using a Windows operating system, you can just search for the option of virtual memory. You will see how much of virtual memory is currently created in your system, and you can even change it if you can decrease or increase the amount of virtual memory in your own operating system. So this arrangement of virtual memory frees the programmers from the concern over memory storage limitations. You can implement applications without bothering about whether I will have sufficient memory to run those applications. Now coming to the operating system operations. Nowadays every operating system is interrupt driven. As I already pointed out, interrupts play a crucial role in multi-programming. So whenever the current process is stopped for some IO operation, the processor will initiate the IO device for completing the IO operation, and the IO device will send the interrupt to the operating system when the operation is over, so that the operating system can go to that particular request and take the data from the keyboard buffer into the main memory. So remember, whenever the IO operation is completed, like on keyboard input, the data is initially becomes available in the keyboard buffer. Then it has to be moved into the memory space of the process which requested for that input. So this task is done with the help of the interrupt. We can also add a trap into the list. So interrupt, how do you differentiate a trap from a interrupt? This is a common standard question. Actually both are highly related. In fact, we can say a trap is a kind of interrupt, but for practical purpose we can differentiate them as interrupt is anything that is related to some hardware or software which is external to the current program. That is, a program is running right now, a hardware makes an interrupt because of some error or it's completed its task, or another program makes that is waiting is also sending a software interrupt. So interrupts are interrupts are not related to the currently running program. They are all external. Whereas a trap is related to the currently running process. Say for example, if the currently running process makes an illegal request, if the currently running process makes a violation of memory or a divide by zero, so it is all related to what is happening in the currently running process, not outside situation. So that is the difference between a trap and a interrupt. A trap is a software generated interrupt and it is caused by these kind of exceptions. And whatever be, whether it is an interrupt or trap, this OS has to do the remedy, or it has to do the response for that interrupt. So this response is already pre-written and it is stored in a particular region of memory. There is an interrupt service routine which is stored somewhere in the main memory, and the OS knows the location or the starting address of the service routine. So every time an interrupt occurs, the OS will simply transfer control to the address of the ISR and it will execute the ISR. So the ISR will check what type of interrupt has happened or notified, and accordingly it will run a function meant for that particular interrupt, and that module will take care of the interrupt. Now we are getting into another concept called modes of operation. So modes of operation was actually already introduced in the previous lecture itself. That is, a system generally runs in two modes of operation, user mode and kernel mode. So that is exactly the same we are now seeing modes of operation. So the reason for the different modes, that's what is being going to be discussed first. So the problem with a single mode of operation is that we are having a number of user programs and along with the OS currently residing in the main memory. So the main memory is filled with operating system and many other user programs. So it may either happen that a program that is currently running gets into an error situation. So it is very important that that error should not affect any other process that is coexisting with the currently running process. So it should not result in any bug in the currently running process, or any bug in one process should not adversely affect another some other process or some other program. For example, if the currently running process gets into an infinite loop, it will continuously keep the CPU and it will never allow the next process to utilize the CPU. This is a worst situation, and which should not happen in a properly implemented operating system. So somehow the OS should sense that the currently running process is misbehaving, and it should remove the process from the memory, from the CPU. So there are plenty of such errors that could happen, that all could result in this situation, and they may even prevent the OS from getting executed. So if the problem is so severe that even the OS cannot get into the CPU and execute. See, sometimes we experience the situation that the system will get hanged. So whatever you try to do, there won't be any response from the system. So the system will be hanged, and you have to restart the system by pressing the power button. That is all situations related to this particular problem. So some erroneous program may be currently holding the CPU permanently without even allowing the OS to take charge, without even allowing the OS to run on the CPU. It will hold the CPU. It's a poor design of OS. If it is well designed OS, then it should not allow a user program to uh, keep the CPU for a long period of time. Now what is the solution? A solution is a potential solution. We can't say that a dual mode eradicates this problem, because even now we experience the problem of restarting requiring, but it gives some reduction, or it reduces the problem when you implement the multiple mode of operation. So normally we will be having the dual mode in most operating systems, but sometimes even multiple modes, that is more than two modes, are also there in some operating systems. So in a properly implemented operating system, an incorrect program should not affect other programs. So the OS should be able to distinguish between the execution of operating system code and user defined code. It requires some hardware support to implement multiple modes. As we have seen in the previous lecture, the OS has to know whether the system is currently running in user mode or kernel mode. And how is it done? It is done with the help of the PSW register, which having a bit called mode bit. So the mode bit is helpful, or it is essential to know or to differentiate user mode from kernel mode. It's an example that indicates the role of two modes. So whenever the user process is running, the mode will be user mode. The moment it makes a system call, then there is a mode switch happen, that the system will turn from user mode to kernel mode, and the OS will run the necessary system call, and then it will return control to the user process, changing the switch mode from once again from kernel mode to user mode. And the kernel mode is also known by supervisor mode, administrator mode, privileged mode. There are also other terms used to refer to that, but for our discussions we will maintain user mode and kernel mode. So the mode bit is crucial for that. So initially when the user program runs, it is going to be running in user mode. The moment it makes a system call, the mode will be changed to kernel mode. So similarly, for example, printf, fork, fopen, divide by 0, they all will cause mode switch to kernel mode. When the system is started at the beginning, it is going to begin from the kernel mode, because when the OS is running, it is always in kernel mode. As whenever the operating system is running in the system, that is it's currently running in the CPU. It's not just that it is present in the memory, it is also running in the CPU at a given moment. At the time, the mode is always kernel mode. The moment operating system leaves the processor and lets it to be utilized by some other user process, then the mode is always user mode. And whenever a trap or interrupt occurs, the hardware switch from user mode to kernel mode. So the point is that whenever the operating system gains control of the computer, the system will invariably be running in kernel mode, because the OS is going to always be given the complete privilege of the system, unlike the user processes, which will be given only some limited privilege to execute only certain functions. Now memory protection is implemented with the help of the dual mode. So what is memory protection? Memory protection is a way to control memory access rights on a computer. So it has nothing to do with the hardware memory protection. It is about data protection of the content of the main memory. Imagine that right now the main memory is occupied by a number of user processes along with the operating system and with their data. So that the memory is generally having these three content: user process and their data and the operating system. So all these are residing in the main memory at any point of time. So memory protection is about ensuring that uh, no user process is able to corrupt some the other user process or even operating system. So there should be a boundary maintained clearly, that a user process can execute, but it can't execute causing damage to some other user process. A kind of malware, a virus, is typically written for this purpose. It always tries to breach the boundary and tries to alter the code of another process or even operating system. So ensuring that this does not happen is the idea behind memory protection. And dual mode gives an easier way of protecting it, because so if a erroneous program gets into the CPU, it can't does everything on its own, because we have already seen that a lot of privileged activities, even accessing IO devices, is controlled by the operating system. So it has to the OS has to be requested for that any such privileged instruction through a system call, and the OS will determine whether this has to be this can be accepted for the given process, and then it will get it done by its own module. So it's never going to give direct access to the user process. So in this way, the OS has the chance of checking whether the request made by the current process is legal or illegal. If the current process is requesting to modify some content outside its memory region, it will be treated as illegal request, and the OS will never let it to happen. So this is highly useful. The dual mode is very useful in memory protection. And so we are going to, the operating system classifies certain instructions as privileged instructions. Any instruction that has the potential of damaging the operating system or any other user processes, they are all will be treated as privileged instructions, and only the OS will have the right to invoke them. That's the idea behind memory protection. So the hardware allows privileged instruction to be executed only in kernel mode. If any other process makes an attempt to execute them, it will be treated as a trap. So a trap will be the current process will be trapped, and it will be killed instantly by the operating system. So that is the idea of memory protection. So privileged instructions are helpful, and privileged instructions are only run in kernel mode, and any attempt of trying to execute the privileged instruction by a normal user process will be treated as a trap. So example of privileged instructions are IO control, timer management, and interrupt management. And as I pointed out, though dual mode is more than sufficient for most cases, we do have some the implementation of multiple modes. For example, we have the situation of virtual memory manager, which is coming under virtualization. So when you implement virtualization in an operating system, it will have an additional mode called virtual machine manager, which has its own privileges. It does not strictly go by the OS privileges. So there is a special privilege given to the virtual machine manager. So it will be treated as a third mode. So VMM will be running as a third mode. So this is an example of a multiple mode system. Another example of such a system is Intel 64 family of CPUs that seems to have 4 privilege levels. So these are examples. So the next topic is system calls implementation. So we know very well, I hope at this point of time you all know very well the meaning of system calls and the purpose of system calls. Now we will just see some information about how is it actually implemented in the OS. So system calls provides the mechanism for a user process to invoke the modules of the operating system. So we have just seen the need of dual mode and the need of privileged instructions and the need of protecting. Just you have to have a holistic understanding of all the concepts. See, all are interrelated. System calls, dual modes, memory protection. So they are all complementing each other. Now system call is the one through which a user program can invoke a privileged instruction with the help of invoking a OS module. So there are variety of ways for implementing the system calls. One technique is a system call takes the form of a trap to the interrupt vector. So we have seen that there is an interrupt vector or interrupt service routine available, so which will be having the code for handling any interrupt. The system call can be treated as one more interrupt, that is a software interrupt. So whenever a system call is made, it's going to be considered as a software interrupt, and there is a trap, and it will go into the interrupt service routine, which will have the necessary system call logic or the definition, so it will be invoked. And there are also two variants in the implementation. One is using a generic trap instruction, which is common for all types of system calls, or using separate system calls for each type of system types. So, as I told, the system calls will be treated as software interrupt, and it goes to the interrupt service routine, and based on the mode bit, the operating system will determine whether it can be executed or not. If it is running in user mode, then it has to go through the process of changing the mode from user mode to kernel mode, and replacing the current process by the module of the OS, and then completing it, and then restoring the mode again. So the system call service is part of the OS, and so whenever a system call is made, it's not just the call that is enough to complete the or execute the system call. It may also need pass various parameters. We have even seen in the fork call that you have to pass arguments. So those arguments will I mean, even we have seen that the pipe, and we will see many other system calls. So all the system calls require parameters. Even if you take a printf, you have to pass some value to printf, and that value will be passed to the system call module, system module of the OS. Like we have seen that the printf is related to the write. Write is the system call behind printf. So whatever the argument we pass to the printf has to be forwarded to the write, then only it can fulfill the our request. So arguments needs to be transformed transmitted from user process to the operating system. There are three ways of achieving it, which we already covered. We can write them into certain registers, or we can write them into stack, or we can write them into a certain memory address. Generally, the second approach is widely practiced. So a stack is always associated with currently running processes, and they are used to exchange the arguments with the OS. So the kernel, once it receives the parameters from the user process, will check whether they are all valid and proper, and then it will decide whether the system call can be invoked. So the lack of we have already seen that hardware support is needed for dual mode operation. So a mode bit is needed. Without it, it's not possible to differentiate different modes. So we can only implement a single mode operation. So hardware is important. So there are some operating systems which don't have that this option of the implementing the dual mode. So for example, MS-DOS was a older operating system, and by the time they just implemented with in a single mode system. It's like whoever is running this operating system will become the administrator, and he can do whatever he wants within the computer. So he can even corrupt the operating system by writing some by making call to certain functions. So this is a poor implementation of OS, but now in modern operating systems we always have the dual mode operation. So whenever a user program fails in some way, it's going to result in an illegal instruction call and gets trapped. And the only option we have, the operating system will have in such a situation, is to terminate the abnormal program, and it may show an error message to the user that the program may be dumped. And when I mention this term dumped, you should be able to recall a similar word that you are very much familiar with. Uh, can you recall what I am talking about, and what is that word dumped connected to you in your experience of doing C programming under the Ubuntu operating system? So I'm actually talking about core dump. So core dump is a fatal exception that you all experienced when you tried some C programs. So whenever the program runs into illegal request, it all treated as it all is core dumped. So a core dump is a piece of code that tries to do read and write operation in a read-only location in memory or freed block of memory. It's called as a core dump. It's basically an illegal attempt being made. So what will happen is that whenever the current program does some this kind of a mistake, the OS will store the current instance of its map into the into the memory, so that the user can investigate it to see what went wrong. We generally do it, we just go to the source code and check whether we have made any mistake, but there is a better way of handling this. We can go through the core dump made for that particular instance of execution to investigate what really caused the core dump and how to rectify it. This approach is used for large programs. When you have a large program, you will have no clue what went wrong, that resulted in core dump. So it is, you have to investigate the core dump made for that particular program, which is a record state of the working memory of a computer program, and it is generally written to a file so that a user can or programmer can examine it and correct and restart the program. So core dump is used for this purpose. Now the last part of our discussion is the role of timer. So we have already hinted about the need of a timer with the time shared system. So time sharing is dividing the CPU time and distributing it to equally to all the user process. So time quantum is essential. So when you want to implement time sharing, you obviously need a clock. So there is a system clock needed which will keep counting the time, and whenever the time has expired for the current process, then it will trigger a switch. So we can't allow a user program to get stuck in an infinite loop or fail to call system services. And to accomplish this, we generally use a timer. So the timer is set to interrupt the computer after a specified period of time, and this period may be fixed or variable. So how is it generally implemented is that the counter will be loaded with a certain value, which is the value as the time quantum value given for the current process, and when the time, and it will be decremented slowly. When the value gets negative, it will be understood by the operating system that the current process has completed its time quantum, and it will immediately preempt that particular process and will bring a new process. And one more point I want you to understand is that preempt is a terminology which refers to removing the currently running program or process forcefully. Okay, remember this, since it will be needed for under CPU scheduling. So forcefully stopping and removing the currently running process is called preemption. So this particular purpose, the timer is crucial. So in this video lecture, we discussed a lot of fundamental points and concepts related to operating system, starting from multi-programming, interrupts, system calls, dual mode or modes of operation, memory protection, the need of timer. So make sure that you all get all these points clearly, because as we progress into other topics, you should be able to relate these concepts with those discussions. Spend some time and understand all the points carefully. Thank you.